The Legacy of Colonialism in Africa, The Road to Independence, the subject in the first of a podcast series and now a book by journalist Pierre Haski. Thanks for being with us here on.
Thank you.
Décolonialisms is the name of it. Before I ask you about that, though, your reaction to this story of the French President Emmanuel Macron. He's done these joint commissions on history when it came to Rwanda, when it came to Algeria,
Cameroon
yes. Also, and this sort of trying to address the colonial past. That enough time has now passed. How's it going?
It just shows, first of all, that the legacy of colonialism doesn't go away. Whether it's 200 years, as in the case of Haiti, or 65 years, as in the case of Africa. And this idea of commissions of historians is a way for a politician to establish some kind of scientific consensus before making hard decisions. It's going to be very hard for France to recognize it owes such a debt. It's a huge figure that is at stake. And so I think having historians working on it is a way of making it more acceptable for everybody before announcing concrete decisions. But I think after that step, there'll have to be concrete decisions.
Yeah, how do you do it, though? Because if they have to give money to Haiti, what about Algeria?
Well, the case of Haiti is very special because Haiti paid back France for more than a century because of the property that was seized, the French properties, the French settlers and slave owners who were taken by the new state of Haiti. So that's a pretty, you could say it's a very special, specific case that is not exactly the same as colonialism in general. The debt is not for colonialism, is about the money that Haiti paid back.
And like you say, the past continues to be in the present. We see it with France, as we've just mentioned, with those examples. You see it with Britain, with most notably with that commission a few years back regarding the Mau Mau rebellion.
Yes, I think it affects everybody, and every country has settled this issue its own way. And you had that also in South Africa after the end of apartheid, when you had this Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I think you have to find ways of dealing with that. There was this idea at some stage that Emmanuel Macron, when he came to power, he made his first speech in Africa, was in Ouagadougou, soon after he came to power, and he said to students, he said, like you, I was born after colonialism, as if he could be exempted from the responsibility that France has about that period. I think it was a mistake to have imagined that he's the head of a state that has a legacy, that has a history, and therefore we see it today, even with young people in Africa who haven't experienced colonialism and maybe have a fantasy idea of what it is, but it affects the relationship between France and African countries in a big way, and you have to face the burden of history.
Yeah, and France and Africa is a particularly symbiotic relationship. Even countries that have broken off with Paris, like the juntas in Mali, Niger, and Burkina, well, their money's still printed in France at this point, so because they have a common currency. But let me ask you about this, because you had, and you talk about in one of your episodes, one country that was kind of punished for not playing, being part of this group, and that's Guinea, yes. Which decided to say no to General de Gaulle's offer of a monetary union.
Yes, the case of Guinea is very interesting because in 1956, Nkrumah proclaims independence of Ghana, the British Gold Coast. It was the first one in Africa. And soon after, de Gaulle came to power and offered a kind of semi-autonomy, a community of France and African countries. And he made a referendum and he toured Africa, and Guinea was the only one to vote no. And that was the end of it. Not only it did become independent, but it was punished for that. There was economic punishment, there was political punishment, there were destabilization attempts by Jacques Foccart, who was General de Gaulle's
dirty tricks man,
exactly. That's the right way to present him. And that created a very complicated relation with Sékou Touré, the leader of Guinea, becoming paranoia, seeing plots everywhere. Some of them were true and some of them were fake. And that country never recovered from that era. And that's a real lesson of history, is that the relation at that time were not based on sound basis. De Gaulle wanted African countries to be independent, but remaining very strongly connected to France. There was what we call France-Afrique, a system, a network of influence, of a very strong French presence in the heart of the state through the army or through advisors that was widespread during the whole 20 years that followed the independence.
And just one final question, because there is no one-size-fits-all. You mentioned the example of Ghana. Ghana went through a terrible time after independence. There were 4 coups. And today it's considered one of the success stories of West Africa.
Yes, the lesson of going through, I chose to draw the profile of the fathers of the nation, the first independence presidents, because these were men who were idealists. And Nkrumah is a typical example, and he remains today a big figure of Pan-Africanism. But they were hardly prepared to face the reality of economic development, of social development, and they mostly ended up in failure. And Nkrumah was overthrown by a coup. There is an episode in his when he was still president. He arrives at the cabinet meeting, and the Minister of Finance tells him there's no more money in the coffers, and he says, but there must be a mistake. And Nkrumah doesn't understand that the country is ruined. And a few months later, the army takes over. So you have this lesson that can be taken also from that history, that it's not enough to have a powerful political ideal. You also need to have concrete answers to very concrete problems that affect millions of your citizens. And that's the bitter lesson of history that is still not completely understood and taken. But it's also a lesson on the relation between France, Europe, the former colonial powers, and Africa. And my feeling, and that's why I wrote this book, is that this story is fading away. People tend to, especially here, tend to forget about the 60s and these powerful figures. And we need to remember them and to acknowledge what happened, to be able to build a sounder relation between Africa and France and Europe. And that, I think, is the more necessary today with Trump, with the chaos of the world. If there's one time when a relationship between those two continents is needed, is today, where nobody can go it alone, and nobody wants to return to the balance of power of imperial times. And France and Africa should be able to build something new. But first you have to
have a clear-eyed look at the past.
To clean the past.
Many thanks for that. Pierre Haski, the book is called Décolonisations, so is the podcast. When are we getting an English language version?
Oh, I hope so. I would love to.
All right. The call is out. Many thanks, Pierre.
Thank you.